Hello, Steve. Nice to see you again, mate.
You too, brother?
Good. Should we talk about Brexit?
Oh,
You're
do
probably
we have
sick
to?
and tired of it. It's been going on for what feels a lifetime. It's actually been pretty much my kids' lifetime, actually. My teenage kids have sort of had nothing but it, and you're maybe tired of it now. But let's just talk about it again because I see that Keir Starmer is looking to reset the relationship with the EU.
Yeah.
Um, does that fill you with joy?
No, it fills me with horror because he's just set the country up for an absolutely huge row. He doesn't want to be in the customs union and he doesn't want to be in the single market. Those are red lines. So what does he want? It feels like back to 20, I don't know, 17, where the country doesn't know what it wants. The truth is, there's quite a lot of incremental improvement can be made to the trade and cooperation agreement. But Keir Starmer's going to set a lot of people off. He's going to disappoint Remainers who are hoping for something huge, and he's going to anger Leavers who think he's betraying Brexit. A lot of the details quite complicated, and people won't be reasonable about it. All that effect that we talk about is going to come in. People are going to get very angry. I think Keir Starmer set us up for a really unproductive conversation.
Yeah, it should. It actually reminds me of something I meant to. I've been meaning to ask you for a while. Is that when I can remember when Theresa May's deal was going through Parliament, and there were people on television, yourself and others. No one was happy with that deal, and many people would say, well, it satisfies neither Brexiteers nor Remainers. It isn't, in some sense, that a good deal because of where we were split
Yeah.
we were split 52-48. Did you don't you want a deal that almost like satisfies nobody, given that we were quite polarized at the time?
Well, I think it's important in a deal that everybody's given a little bit in order to get something which is lasting. I think if you're going to have general public consent, you can't have one half parading round victorious. So everybody's got to feel they've given a little bit. But I think, on the other hand, having a deal that is totally unsatisfactory to everybody isn't a win. And
Yeah.
that deal was unsatisfactory to everybody. And it would have split the Tory party and let Corbyn in, which was the proximate problem. But I don't think it would have lasted either.
So I'm sure I know you would have been asked this many times, and we've discussed it privately, but maybe publicly. Knowing all that you know now, a decade on, was it worth it?
So I've asked myself that often. I was actually asked that question in front of a group of young people, and bearing in mind all that I've had to go through as well as the nation, I didn't know what to say. But unusually, my wife was in the room, and she just said yes, yes, it was worth it. And she knows what I've been through, and we've been through, and the country's been through. But it's about democratic control of political power, and one of the things that's astonished me, and it's very much the point of our provocation people work, is the extent to which people just don't understand one another. They talk straight past each other. I was a European federalist until I realized we'd lost control of democratic legitimacy, lost control of political power. And that really mattered to me. And I've been amazed that it doesn't really matter to everyone. But
No. So on that democratic deficit point, it's interesting, isn't it? Because there's a recent poll out or surveys out. I don't know the exact details of these, but showing that many of the Gen Zs are now in favour of dictatorships over democracy. They would prefer a strong leader who doesn't have to go through Parliament, that can go round Parliament and to some large degree past the courts as well. Do you think that maybe part of the reason why the democratic deficit wasn't such a prominent argument, hasn't been taken, certainly not on by the Remain side anywhere near as much as it should, is because actually people don't care about democracy as much anymore?
well, it might well be that they don't, and it's probably because the world doesn't work very well for them. And this, I do think, is one of the patterns of history: is that when the world's not working for people, they will cry out for a strong man to rescue them, and it's a really big problem. But the proper purpose of democracy to me is so that the public can peacefully remove dysfunctional governments. And it might be argued that that's just happened. But what do you do if you're ruled by somebody who you can't peacefully remove? And that means you have to remove them the other way. And that's extremely difficult and painful. And revolutions hurt a lot of people. So that's the fundamental reason why democracy matters, because if you can't remove the government peacefully, you have to remove them the other way. And if we've not even learned that from history, that's a
No,
pretty sad
I,
affair.
I completely agree with you. We had the Brexit vote for good or for ill, and we had the result we got, and so we have to make the most of it. That's absolutely. I was absolutely clear in my own mind about that
But
because
I,
the because that democratic process for me is absolute, and that's something that you and I know we share a strong faith in, is that democratic process is absolutely fundamental. It's the first order condition.
Yeah, I think so. But I've learned a lot from you about this, about the fundamental attribution error, which perhaps you'll explain in a minute. But also this idea that people don't change their mind. Well, if something really matters to them, they don't change their opinion. And of course, we're living through that. But why don't you just tell people who are watching what the fundamental attribution error is?
I know it's interesting that you've been taken by this. It's a well established psychological phenomenon where if I observe you stealing a chocolate bar from a shop, then you're a thief. So I can immediately decide that you're a type of person who steals. You are a person who steals. You are a thief. If I steal a chocolate bar, it's much more context dependent. Maybe I overpaid in the shop before. Maybe the staff were rude to me. Maybe I'm really hungry. Right? I'm not a thief, although I've stolen a chocolate bar. And so we attribute very quickly good and most often ill to other people when we identify ourselves as being a much more complex combination of good and evil, much more ambivalent about ourselves than we are about other people. Actually, we're all fundamentally good, really, but to ourselves, but other people we can quickly identify as being one or the other.
Yeah, and I think the reason I'm so taken with it is that it's been a fundamental feature of my life for so long, certainly in my postbox. But should we talk about what's going on with Donald Trump? How do you view the polarity that's come up with Donald Trump taking the presidency again in the USA?
Well, it goes back to the democracy point. I mean, he won. He won the general election. Not only did he win the presidency, he won the popular vote. Right. So there's no democratic deficit there at all. No one can claim that he should not be president. I mean, they can claim he should not have been able to stand for being president. There may be other reasons that would disbar him, but given that he stood, we have to accept that he's the US president, and so that's the first thing to say. And if it's incumbent, it seems to me, on all of us, but particularly those who lost, to understand just why he won the popular vote.
Yeah.
And to really have a proper grown-up conversation that isn't, and it's a bit like Brexit as well. It was people who voted Brexit were racist or stupid, or racist and stupid, as if you can just dismiss 52% of the population. Now you can dismiss all of these people who voted Trump, and it's not as straightforward as that. That's clearly a tiny fraction of the people that voted for him.
Yeah.
So understanding why people were put off by the alternatives is, for me, as someone who would prefer those alternatives, fundamentally important.
So thinking about companies in the USA right now, they will face polarity amongst their workforces, people who support Trump, people who can't stand the way he goes about things, but maybe like some of his policies, people who just hate everything about him. What can companies do to help manage their workforce through a time of quite a lot of polarity and possibly some hostility?
Yeah, it's a super question. So no one's going to do it by willpower. We're not going to will ourselves tolerant. It's hard. We don't actually want to listen to disagreement and people that have different views. Sometimes it's hard for us, and we'd all like to get on. It's easier getting on. We want to see people nod their heads rather than shake them. So we're going to need to design tolerance into organisations. We need to do that by some of the ways in which I recommend it in my new book that'll be out in May, and the way that we're doing it through our company. So I hope people would want to get in touch with us and find out more about that. But also sometimes it's worth saying. Sometimes it's actually being clear about what is worthy of discussion in the workplace and what isn't. Right? Some things might be off limits. They might not want to be issues that people discuss. But what we all ought to do is to be able to listen to disagreement and dissent in relation to cognitive diversity, in relation to having different perspectives and beliefs and views on how the company should go forward, what productivity might look like, what DEI might or might not look like, all the things that contribute towards the success, the economic and social progress of an organization, of an institution, and of wider society. And as I say, we're only really going to do that if we embed tolerance by design and not by desire. Let me ask you, Steve. Listen, look, you've spent a lot of time thinking about growth and about productivity puzzle and some of the challenges we face around tax and spend.
Yeah.
We, according to the ONS today, UK population is likely to hit about 72.5 million by 2032, with 10 million people arriving and 5 million people leaving. So a net migration of 5 million. A good thing for economic growth?
Well, I don't know. Not in the institutional environment that we have. I mean, I think with taxes at this level, um, arguably at around the practical historic limit of taxation in the UK, it's difficult to see that the jobs will be created for those people. Indeed, at the moment, jobs are being destroyed as we go on. So we could end up in a position where large numbers of people are coming here and we're not managing to employ them. I mean, that kind of turnover will, I think, be very challenging to manage politically, never mind socially. For me personally, I've found that people I've met from all around the world tend overwhelmingly to be lovely and do me no harm. And I'm culturally relaxed. I don't mind. I'm glad to have different cultures around. But I recognize that lots of people aren't relaxed about cultural differences and see the place where they grew up changing and they don't like it much. So if we have that kind of turnover, it's going to be really, really important that people learn to talk to one another and don't misascribe their motivations for what they do. It's going to be really important that the law is applied equally to everyone, that expectations are set out really clearly. But yeah, it's going to be really challenging. But to be honest, I think growth-wise, we've got a real problem of pensions. We've got a real problem of taxation. We overregulate, which the
Do
Labour.
we have just on the pensions piece? I mean, clearly it's not. I'm not asking you to say either or, but to what degree is the amount? I think about was it half of our benefits bill is pensions? Is that right? Is that
Well, that sounds about right, but more than that, the unfunded state and public sector pension liabilities massively dwarf the official national debt. We're talking about multiple trillions of pounds of unfunded state and public sector pension liabilities, and we are not going to be able to pay them. That's in the OBR's
so
for.
is it that we're paying too much in pensions, or we have too many pensioners? And to what degree is it one or the other?
Well, I mean, it's the balance between pensioners and the working age population. So what do you do about that? Either you have to reduce the pension benefit that people are entitled to, or you have to restore the balance of the numbers of workers supporting each pensioner. Well, people won't like that. I mean, that vast migration that you talked about probably isn't enough to
But
restore
but
the
but, but so why
dependency
but,
rate.
but why don't so why wouldn't they like that? So what happened then? Because in 1908 we instituted the old age pension. I remember people being called the old age pension when I was a kid. 1908, at the age of 70, I think you were able
Yeah.
to qualify for a pension.
And you
People
were
were dead
lucky
by
to,
50. People were dead by 50, right?
yeah,
So you got a pension if you were really fucking lucky,
yeah,
right? Now you get a pension for like sometimes up to a third of your life.
yeah,
Um, and that's we kind of creep towards that. And any suggestion that we might increase the retirement age is met with hostility, even though we've
yeah.
been adding years of life expectancy
Well,
consistently over the last 50 years. So why isn't it that we can't like just increase the retirement age?
well, it's a great question, but people just won't bear it, right? And I'm afraid, of much as I love officials, public sector pensions are so very generous that people can expect a long and comfortable retirement if they've accrued a large public sector pension. And lovely for them, but what if the whole nation can't afford it? But yeah, I mean, the public choice factors are at work there. Look at what happened with the WASPy women. That was terrifically difficult for men about my age because it felt like you were talking to women about your mum's age, telling them they were going to have to work a bit longer. And they were not happy at all to be told that they would need to work a few more years. People seem to sort of pace themselves to flop over the line into retirement exhausted. Um, it does raise important questions about the quality of work that we have, the quality of relationships at work. People really in the 21st century ought to be able to enjoy their work. Um,
Well, do you know what? That's exactly it. So for me, there's a really strong well-being argument for raising the retirement age, not just in itself, because a lot of people hate work and are desperate to retire, but because that would recast that conversation and ensure that if I knew, I mean, if I was in a job that I didn't like and I knew I was going to work there for 10, another, you know, 20 years instead of 10,
yeah,
then my relationship with my employer should change, and there's much more incentive for both employers and employers to improve well-being in work, rather than seeing work as a cost
Yeah.
that you bear, that you suffer to the point at which you can retire and then probably never live as long as you expect to anyway, never enjoy retirement as much as you thought you would. You know, a couple of weeks is nice, 20 years less so. I think there's very many good reasons why it's both efficient and fair to raise the retirement age, and also could be welfare improving, well-being improving as well.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very interesting political question because I think we're on a burning platform over pensions. And if we don't do something really serious to unfunded pension liabilities, we'll have a really serious problem of default. I mean, the nation's finances will be ruined. Your ability to recast retirement in that much more or rather recast work in that much more positive light could be very, very important. It'd be interesting to see you poll it and do some focus groups and see whether people will vote for you on that basis.
Yeah, well, let me ask you about the politics thing. So, does it really matter to you who's in government, given these big, almost existential questions that we've got around migration, around growth, around pensions? Does it, like, are we not are not both political parties just rearranging deck chairs and
Well, I've heard it said time and time again that we're the uniparty, which I do reject. But the trouble is, the facts don't change when the government changes. We've still got the same problems to deal with. Now, we do have fundamentally different ideas about it. If the Conservative Party's had one major fault, it's been failing to believe in itself through the last few years and to make attractive what we believe. It's too easy to people to slip into selfishness. And actually, cooperation and market economy isn't selfish. It's about creating value for others. But, I digress. But I'm afraid reform aren't there on spending. Reform haven't fronted up to the sheer scale of the unfunded pension liabilities, and their voters will be very, very disappointed if they ever come near power. So that I'm afraid this is back to that point about people losing faith in democracy. At the moment, it does look like there is no British political party capable of remotely having the conversation which needs to be had about how we're going to pay for pensions.
interesting? Let me just have on the tax thing. Yeah, it reminds me of something else that we've discussed, but is worth having a more public discussion about, is the absolutely fundamental regard that most British citizens have for equality of opportunity. But wanting people to start the race for life, broadly speaking, at the same starting point when the gun goes off, and
Yeah.
then success and failure, emerge through a fair game. At the same time as being, if polling is to be believed, that people are very resistant to inheritance tax, and especially high rates of inheritance tax. Maybe on the moral grounds that you've been taxed once while you're alive and then being taxed again when you're dead seems unfair. How do we square those? How would you square those two concerns? Because of course it's fundamental. It's true by definition that if I'm passing on assets as a rich person to my rich kids, they're going to have a head start over poorer kids whose parents couldn't pass anything on to them.
Well, I think it deserves really strong exploration, both on, as it were, moral principle grounds and also on data-driven quantitative grounds. Because it does seem to me that allowing people to accumulate the means of production, we're not talking about people hoarding cash under the bed here. We're talking about them owning assets which have a return. And it does feel to me like allowing the means of production to be accumulated is a way of creating opportunity for everybody. I would like our country to be more productive with more higher paying, better jobs. Now, what happens when the government taxes people with inheritance tax is that money disproportionately will be just go into the government coffers and be spent on present consumption. And that's the crucial thing, is to me, taxing away capital, accumulated the capital, which is the means of production, to spend it on consumption today, that is a policy of effectively living on your savings. And it's not a recipe for future prosperity. But so that's why I'm extremely cautious about it. I think if I believed that the world would be a fairer and better place if we had a 100% inheritance tax and everybody had to go to state school, I'd have to, I'd have to revisit some of my fundamental beliefs. But I'm afraid I think that the world would be a better place if we had a zero inheritance tax and raised the overall level of schooling for everybody and had more capital to create more better jobs.
Well, I'm smiling because I think it's worth just mentioning our conversation last week that we had, where we were talking about sort of superstar head teachers at schools and how they, bring the kids up and elevate their kids. Well, it really matters who the head of school is.
Yeah.
And my initial reaction was and I said to you, that's just wrong. In the sense that some people are going to be lucky enough to go to the school that has the superhead and everybody else isn't. And you laughed and you said, why is that wrong?
It's just life. Yeah.
It seems like just life. And I loved how we then had an exchange about that, because we end up having a really fucking interesting conversation about the substance of fairness and other things when we come from those different perspectives. We're almost wired to look at that issue as our starting position.
Yeah.
To be different. And I think that's what I think we're selling in the nicest possible way into organizations, is to look at the world, have people in your organization who just naturally look at the problem, that challenge around productivity, growth, whatever, around the future of AI or whatever it is, just from wholly different perspectives, and to come together and almost sometimes laugh at each other about how could you possibly start with that frame of reference?
Yeah. But of course, our laughter is based on a framework of mutual respect and admiration, isn't it? And in a sense, what we need to do is establish institutions which can lead towards that sort of greater degree of understanding, but which don't rely on it being there up front.
Yeah,
So,
and not
that's
presupposing and not presupposing that there's any right way forward until you've properly flushed out those different vantage points that people see the world from. I think that's why I aside from our friendship, that's why I am so excited about the Provocation people, is because we are genuinely walking the walk.
Yeah.
It's easy to say work with people that you disagree with, but we're constantly finding points of departure that we're having to work our way through.
But I'm excited about our company as well, but particularly about being in America, because I noticed that Trump is going to be a polarizing figure. And I was particularly struck that 37 Signals said no politics at work. And the next day, a material proportion, my memory is telling me about a third of people quit. I'll have to check the figures now. But people do want to discuss their differences, and they want to discuss them in a way which doesn't lead to huge hostility. And, it's not just about managing downside risks, is it? We've talked before about helping people to become more innovative and more productive. So maybe this is a win-win, because people can deal with the downside risk of hostility through politics bleeding into the workplace. But having dealt with it through embedding the institutions we've talked about, then they become more productive and innovative because they're better able to take advantage of those different perspectives.
And I think they're also, frankly, I think they're just more interesting and smarter people. I mean, we all are. I feel like a more interesting and smarter person from knowing you, even though, as you said yourself before, I didn't change your mind about it very much. I don't think I've actually changed my mind about very much at all from listening to you. But what I have got is a fresh perspective on things, and maybe more more nuance. Maybe sometimes, maybe that's it. Maybe it's more nuance in what I think rather than.
Well, I feel very much the same. I can now talk about the fundamental attribution error and explain to people some various concepts from behavioral science, and it's certainly enriched my life and my ability to approach problems. So, Paul, absolutely brilliant to jump on this call together.
Brilliant. No, thank you, mate. Always lovely to talk to you.